I don't remember much from that night. I was around 8 at the time, around that age where young boys can pay attention to Transformers toys and nothing else. All I can remember is a noise, a loud screaming coming from the other rooms of the house, and then hearing it all stop, like the calm before the storm, as sirens and blue uniformed men entered our home. Now to this day, I don't exactly know what happened that night, or countless other nights, yet flash forward to 2021 and I can definitely put together the pieces. I believe that was my first account of trauma. We rode in a police car to my mother's friend's house, not far down the road. I slept on the floor that night. Nothing more than a couch pillow, a thin blanket, and my older sister's arms wrapped around me. It was comforting for the time being, but we lived in the Gold Coast at the time, a supposed holiday dreamland. Not for me, though. No big, flashy house, tropical climate, and theme parks could take me away from the monster that was living with my own home at the time. I'm just really lucky I never met that monster firsthand. Now, my mother distanced herself from anything of importance to try and escape the world that she now lived in. She would care for my sister and I, but emotionally, she wasn't the same. We soon moved out of our large mansion-like home in Benoa Waters, a very high-class suburb on the Gold Coast, and moved into a 2-bedroom duplex in Emerald Lakes down the road. And it was really nice. My sister and I shared a little room, my mother had her own master bedroom, and we made it home. The year was 2011, and I just turned 9. Life was great. I would see my father every fortnight, and he would try his best to separate mine and my sister's lives from the drama going on between my mother and him. Now, although I do have my reservations about him, I do respect him for not involving me in the drama that was going on at the time. Life just slowly became uncruisy, as it were. I became depressed and resorted to escapism, rather than maintaining my little introverted personality at the time. I became an extrovert for purely survival reasons. Rather than a nerd, I was now seen as the joker, the clown, the kid that would act out and not have a single care in the world. I now hated being quiet, and silence was my kryptonite. And when the silence came, I would have to face the reality of my broken home. I just wanted to get away from it all. And my mother posed the question of, do you want to move to Sydney? And I said yes. And in hindsight, it's probably the worst decision I've ever made. But now 12 years later, I lived in student accommodation in Wollongong, living with my girlfriend and 2 other roommates. Now in reflection, I'm so angry it took me so long to get where I am today. But it was all worth it. All the struggle, all the work, it was all worth it. Then we had to move to Sydney and my mum had to get a job. And before her starting work, I'd never even heard the term mental health. The whole concept of someone being unwell or crazy was distantly foreign to me. Even so, anyone within a 5-kilometre radius could tell that my mum was unwell. My mum, Isabel Eleanor Rodas, grew up in a very straight, strict Chilean family. Something like mental illness was always swept under the rug to maintain the idea that they were the perfect Australian immigrant family, to make no trouble in the neighbourhood. Now my mum has suffered from severe anxiety her whole life, and even on attempts to reach out and seek help, she's shut down by her own family. Attempts at gaining comfort from her own mother got her mum to call her a queer, furthering her own anxieties within her home, and it slowly severed my mum's relationship with my grandmother. Now years passed and Isabel was no longer Isabel. She was my mum. And with this, she selflessly decided to suppress her own disability for the betterment of her own children. Her work started and she was comfortably supporting us kids. A year had passed in Sydney and my sister and I were cruising our way through year 6 and year 10. We'd settled our way into our new lifestyle and we grew to appreciate the smaller things in life, which was a great learning curve, as things were about to get a lot worse. Now my sister and I came home to an empty house. My mum had to work late, we assumed, so we made our way to our grandmother's house. I called her Nana. She made us hot dogs that day after school, and even though I hate them, I ate them out of respect. Now, whilst halfway through that disgusting bread roll and processed meat, we heard a honking of a horn and a screech of tyres outside. Curious but also concerned, Nana told us to put our bags upstairs. By the time we had done that, my mother was in the house. But it wasn't the mum I was used to. Tears running down her face, screaming like she had seen the devil. My sister and I watched the chaos unfold in front of our eyes. Now, to this date, I'd never seen anyone as conflicted as my mother in that state. She was angry, sad, scared, and shameful all at the same time, and her subconscious had just taken over as the image of Isabel Rodas, my mum, faded away before our eyes. Now, the event took 30 minutes to unfold until my mum couldn't scream anymore, and she fell into an uncontrollable state of sobbing. My nana took my mum to her GP, who immediately transferred her to the psychiatric ward of St. George Hospital. She'd experienced a psychotic episode. For a time, I'd lost my mother completely, and we had to rebuild from there. So after my mum went to hospital, her 9-week prison break as she calls it, life went sort of back to normal. But we did have a new character in the house. It's almost at that day that my mum snapped, another part of her personality came to life. She wasn't the all-seeing, all-true, benevolent, godlike character anymore. She was like one of us, one of the kids. Mum would put on characters around the house to make us laugh. She even became a lot more involved with my sister and I socially. But my father was extremely absent during this time, and I hadn't seen him in months. He lived in Brisbane. I went back to school and finished my final weeks of year 6, ready to graduate and go to high school. Life was kind of smooth sailing, all considered. Although my mum was well in mine and my sister's eyes, Amelia, the government didn't seem to think so. So we jumped on her Centrelink payments very quickly after mum's illness. Mum at the time was on enough sedatives in the morning to put a full-grown man into a coma. She would often joke how many milligrams she took with the other patients in hospital. She'd say, "How many are you on?" She would say, 40, 50, 100, they would reply. With a slick grin and almost a sense of accomplishment, she would say, I'm on 400, with her arms folded as if she was asserting her dominance. For context, 15 milligrams of the meds my mum takes is enough to put someone who's unwell to sleep for the night. She would take 400 in the morning, along with her antidepressants, and 200 at night, and she would still toss and turn in her sleep. Now, in the eyes of the law, due to the medication she takes and her mental illness, she was unemployable. Rent went up, $450 turned into $550 in a matter of months. Mum's illness and credit history prevented her from being successful to any rental properties, and we were well on track to being homeless. Mum applied us to the New South Wales Community Housing Scheme, and we were fast-tracked due to the emergence of the situation and my mum's position in being a carer for us as kids. We were extremely lucky to find a place so quickly. We weren't being picky, but maybe we should have been. See, I just finished my first year of high school when we moved, and it was hell. There wasn't much to the actual apartment that we moved into. It was very simple. Lino floors and white walls, a typical low-income property. But that wasn't the bad part. It was the neighbours that were the issue. I remember walking home and seeing men in hoodies handing over cash for bags of white on every single corner. An ambulance carrying men covered in blood nearly every single week. And worst of all, the used needles on the ground next to literally every single storm drain. Now, most days I was picked up from the station. My school was in the city. I went to St. Mary's Cathedral College, so I had to catch the train. But on the rare occasion that I walked to the station and back, my hands were gripped to my bag so tight that I had cramps in my palms all the way home. Now, there was this one night when I used to go to karate practice on Tuesdays. I hated it, but I went because I just didn't like being at home. Karate practice had finished and no one was there to pick me up. I waited for 30 minutes, no call, no text. The sensei took me home, and I ran up the stairs in the dark, and the stairs reeked like cat piss, and I banged on the door as fast as I could, begging for someone to let me in. I was scared and terrified even. No one was home. My phone had now died, and there was no way for me to get inside. I cried on the top step for nearly an hour, waiting for someone to arrive home. I was cold, it was dark, my heart raced, and I was just scared. And this was my first panic attack of many, many to come. So, months passed, and the property we moved into in Riverwood became the new norm, and I toughened up as a result. I had to change to fit into my new environment. It was at the age of 13 when I started experimenting with alcohol. I had the idea at the time that it would solve my problems and help me deal with my surroundings, but it just didn't. I think then I realized that I have an addictive personality. Once any new thing was introduced into my life, I latched onto it and refused to let it go. I lost so much. The relationship between my parents, losing my relationship with my father, losing my home on the Gold Coast, I lost part of my mother, I lost my new home in Sydney. I just couldn't bear to lose anymore. I was by definition a loser. So to cope, I began to take an interest in drinking and I started to drink. And believe me, I drank pretty heavy. I was amazing at hiding it. I'd buy a bottle of vodka from friends at school and fill a little thermos that I had in my room with it, taking the thermos to and from school. No trace. It was a bad habit, but I needed to stop. And it didn't. It didn't for years. I met her through a friend of a friend. Her name was Remy. She gatecrashed a meetup that I had organised with her friend Grace. And we all watched the latest Star Wars money grab together, and my heart had already made up its mind. I wanted to be with her. Did I mention I had an addictive personality? Because I was immediately hooked. She had long brown hair, eyes that you would just get lost in. She was so shy yet so confident, and she had so much to say but no words to say it with. I was 15. I was infatuated. It was so intriguing to me. It was almost like I had to solve a puzzle that I couldn't take my eyes off of. I had to see what she was all about. So, with everything going on, I decided to try and put it all aside. All the depression, anxieties, everything. As much as I could, at least to the public eye, that is. We started dating soon after that first meeting. My first girlfriend. I couldn't be happier. I met the most beautiful, caring, thoughtful, selfless, and most undeniably human person on the planet. I fell in love with that person after the fastest 6 months of my life. I can definitely say that at its peak, I'd never been happier. But as they say, all things have to come to an end. So we broke up in July of 2017. We experienced our first and only real big fight. It tore an unrepairable bond between the two of us. It was my fault. I told a white lie in hopes to catch her out in doing things that she wasn't doing. She called my bluff, and I was caught out. The reality is, although I tried to stuff my anxieties to the side, I was so scared of her leaving, like most things in my life leading up to that point, that I was paranoid enough to make myself believe the lies that I was telling myself. Now, I'd never involved her or mentioned any anxieties or the stuff that was going home until the day we broke up. And I'm surprised I was able to hold it in for that long. I was playing such a character. But when she left, all that stuff that I pushed aside came rushing back, worse than ever before. And that day that we broke up, I was living in Menai. We'd been shifted house due to a domestic violence situation downstairs, and it was unsafe for us to live at the previous property. Now at Menai, we had a knock on the door, and it was from the Department of Housing for New South Wales. They had big plans for us. With money-grabbing grins, they gave us an eviction notice and a folder full of papers to sign. They told us we had to move out. They were knocking down the property to build a brand new villa complex. It wasn't bad though, because they told us we could look on a property on the private market, and they would rent a place for us at the same rates as housing. It was a fantastic deal, so a week later we moved into a beautiful villa in Gaimea, where my mother still lives today. And even though we were in this fantastic new home, I always carried the thought that something bad was about to happen to me. And I was so used to it by this point that my body almost prepared itself for it. I wasn't anxious, but I was constantly tense. And so I should have been. I was in purgatory. I knew something was going to come up soon. So, 6 months passed, and it was 9 a.m. The date was March 14th. I was lying in bed, not wanting to go to school. My mum gave in after me complaining for an hour and let me stay home. She went to go take care of a friend in the city, and I opened my phone to see a series of messages of my little cousin. My cousin had attended the same school my first girlfriend had. All the text said was, "She's gone. She's passed away. She's jumped. I'm so sorry." I don't believe I've screamed louder in my life. I ran out into the living room. No one was home. My sister was at university, my mother in the city. I was so in shock that I couldn't bring myself to tears. My ex-girlfriend, my first love, had jumped in front of a train at Central Station. Platform 24, the night of 13th of March. We'd spoken a week before on messaging services about seeing each other that upcoming Saturday as well. She passed away on the Tuesday. I'd collapsed in my living room, and I was an absolute mess. Nothing would ever be the same. No one I'd ever known had died before. I processed it in the strangest way. I hibernated. I didn't want to leave my room or talk to anyone. I just completely shut off. And I needed to, for my own survival. It was my brain's self-preservation. All I could think of was the faded memories I have of her, how lucky I was to look at her, and I thought to myself how lucky I was to even be blessed to have her in my life. Now, I'm not a religious person at all, but I do believe I see her in places all the time. In the winds, in animals, in my dreams. At least I can hope that some part of her is still around. She had never mentioned to me her depression or what was going on though. She never mentioned it to anyone. She suffered in complete silence. I really wish I could have been there when she really needed it. Her death took an unprecedented toll on me. My alcohol use went through the roof. I became a recluse and I only left my room when I had to. My school attendance dropped to under 40%, and I never left my room unless I had to eat or shower. I was left to my own devices. My mum and my sister just let me do my own thing. I'll get angry at my family when they even tried to support me, and so they let me down and let me process the whole ordeal in my own way. And I began self-medicating and taking sedatives such as diazepam that I purchased off the internet. I hit rock bottom. I didn't hand in a single assignment, a single piece of work, and only graded my school with presents once in a blue moon. The next few months were the most depressing of my life. And that was until my life ended and started again. It was August 19th, 5 months after her death, and I had made up my mind about what I was going to do. Suicidal thoughts had been plaguing me for months. I knew where I wanted to do it, at Town Hall Station, Platform 4. I remember catching the train to the city from Gaimea, never shedding a single tear. But then when I got there, that tear was all it took. I'd sealed my fate. I got to the platform about 3 p.m. I'd slept in that day. Already my plans were going off a little bit by the book, so I thought twice about making my way to the edge of the platform. I thought, I'd give myself a little bit more time to dwell on it. So I snuck my way into the George Street cinemas and entered around 5 minutes into a screening of Mission Impossible Fallout. Besides all that stuff that was happening, I still recommend the film. Good movie. But besides the point, I came out from that screening. I bought myself a packet of cigarettes from a Chinese supermarket in the city. It was late now, around 7 p.m. So I walked around the city and for hours, just chuffing that horrible packet of smokes. And it was time. I made my way down to platform 4 and put my feet on the very edge of the platform. I closed my eyes. The train came in 1 minute. I had 60 seconds to have my last thoughts. But my mind was blank. It was more a feeling like I had a loud concert locked in my throat. A feeling like storm clouds were in my chest, and a feeling of a hand on my back. A feeling on a hand on my back turned into a tight grip which pulled me away from the bullet that was mere inches away from my face. The station guard had saved my life. I fell to the floor and my legs went completely numb. I leant forward and he pulled me back. I just looked up and I saw his face. His big bald head and red long beard that touched the ground next to me. I decided to sob, harder than I've ever done in my life. I attempted to get back up and catch the next ride out of Earth, and he held me to the floor. He told me that he was okay, and he held me as tight as he could, and he refused to let go. He told me something that I'll never forget. He said, "I understand, man. I'm going through this too, mate. You're not alone." That was the moment when he held me. I just felt like I wasn't alone. It was the first moment in months that I felt like that. And he was the roughest, toughest person I'd ever seen. Tattoos on nearly every inch of his body, 6'4", and easily nearly 160 kilos. No matter how hard or tough he looked, that action was the bravest thing I've seen a person do. And that was when my father finally returned, and he returned indefinitely into my life. He made a decision for me. So after that night, I was admitted to Randwick Public Hospital for 3 days after being discharged. He told my mother the best thing for me was to leave Sydney, and she actually agreed for him. For the first time in 11 years, they settled on something. It made me feel quite good, actually. I got the direction I'd been longing for years. I went home, back to Gaimea, and packed my bags. My dad was going to take me to the Southern Highlands to live with my grandparents. This new location allowed me to separate myself from the whirlwind of a life that I'd lived in Sydney. It allowed me to get back on my feet and re-establish my life on my own accord this time. In this new home, this new playground, unlike anything I've ever experienced, life is calm, life is beautiful, and I'm grateful for every second I spend on this earth. Now flash forward 2 years. I'm now living in Wollongong in student accommodation with my girlfriend who I love heaps. I'm so grateful and thankful for all the experiences that have made me who I am today. I've had an interesting life, I've had a big life, but in hindsight, I would not change a single thing about it because I wouldn't be the person who I am now.